Season 4, Episode 7 of the hit underground radio occult show known as Knights of the Nephilim, brought to you by Celestial Oddities Radio and the Coterie of Semil Arcane Occult Order. As always, I will be your host and guide on this obscure and mysterious journey into magic and mysticism, darkness and divination. I'm Reverend Frater Crow, and it's a pleasure to have you listening tonight. Or today, I should say, because we're doing a special episode. Whether you're listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded this to your device for on the go, I do want to thank you for your patronage and support. Just make sure you click the like, share, and follow button on whatever platform you're tuning in from, whether it be iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, Google, Amazon, YouTube, Facebook, or even Instagram. We air across absolutely everywhere, so listen where you're comfortable. But by clicking those buttons, it moves us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives of not only this show, Knights of the Nephilim, which is based upon esoteric science, occult doctrine, and ritual magic, interviewing and talking with the biggest and best names in occultism, from ritual practitioners and toolmakers to authors, theologians, and mystics, and more. Or it'd be one of our other shows like Celestial Oddities Pair of Normal Guys podcast, also known as Pong, where we talk about paranormal and supernatural phenomena, deep dive into subject matter, interview professionals within the field, and do special episodes known as Odd World, where we take on phone calls from listeners just like you from around the world to hear your strange and extraordinary stories of the unexplained. Or it be our show that we retired called Uncovering the Underground. Almost 100 interviews with music and modeling, stars of the big screen, comedy, oddities, and everything in between. We are always aiming to bring you thought-provoking and mind-expansive entertainment and interviews, and that's certainly what we do here at Knights of the Nephilim, at Celestial Oddities Radio, and the Coterie of Semil. This evening, or today, depending upon where you are listening from, is a episode that I am extremely, excited for, that I have been anticipating heavily. And it is a special episode, as you might be aware, because normally we're Thursday nights, 8:30 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But due to some differentiations in time and schedules, we did a special episode today here Sunday from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the guest we have for you this evening is a powerhouse of knowledge, and I am very, very excited. Before we jump into that, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors, Arsnosis, Arachne Arcane Services, Goetic Impressions, Limitless Liberations, The Telemancer, Belladonna's Botanicals, and Little Shop of Lilith. Throughout this evening, we will take a couple breaks to showcase their pages, let you hear a little bit more about who they are, what they do, where you can check them out at, and if we have a promo code, we'll definitely hook you up with that so that you can save a little bit of money on your purchase. But definitely check them out, pick up something for yourself or for a loved one. Every sponsor that's on this show has great quality material, and I back them personally myself as someone who has tried and tested all of their material, and I'm certainly proud to have them as sponsors of the show. If you missed any of the past episodes this season, make sure you go back and check them out. We've had some great guests. We had Shay Belay, author of Friedrich Nietzsche and the Left-Hand Path. We had Matthew Venus, owner of Spiritum Arcanum out of Massachusetts. Great witchcraft and occult shop there. They give lessons and teachings, and he brings in other people of note to come and teach classes, like Alexander Cummins and folks like that. Great minds to learn from. We have had Augustine Morier, the leader of the Abysmal Black Serpent Satanic Coven. We have had John Vermillion, who is the author of Asaya Kaluxa and his new book, Azaziel, which is a book of Azazel, which is very, very powerful as well. So we've had some great guests. We've had Lon Milo Duquette and some other great names as well. But tonight we get to add to those ranks the one and only David Rankine. And very, very excited to bring him on the show. So let's tell you a little bit about David. And I'm going to do it from the back of his new book, which we're going to be showcasing and talking about tonight, which is a 2-part book. So let me show you, bumping my microphone here. Let me show you this Goliath of a book here. Look at this. This thing is massive, and this is only volume 1 of 2, and that is the Grimoire Encyclopaedia. So let's tell you a little bit about David. David Rankine is an author, esoteric researcher, and magician who lives in England with his wife, artist, and tattooist, Rosa Laguna. He has been making major contributions to the modern occult revival since the 1980s through lectures, workshops, presentations, articles, and books. His esoteric experience covers a wide range of topics, including the Western esoteric traditions, especially the Qabalah, the Grimoire traditions, Greco-Egyptian magic, and ceremonial magic, as well as British folklore and European mythology. His work in recent years has been characterized by the publication of previous unavailable and inaccessible material on the grimoires and other areas of magic. The Grimoire Encyclopaedia is the result of David's years of study and practice with the grimoires. And folks, I can tell you, there's no book like it out there. I mean, the amount of time and effort that would have been put into this book to create it is nothing short of extraordinary, and we will talk about that tonight. If you don't have it, make sure you pick it up. It gives you everything you would ever need to know about grimoire magic, and he's not even done with it. He has plans of expanding onto that later down the road, which is just mind-bending in itself. So as always, I will ask you to grab your ritual athames and put on your ceremonial attire, light your candles and focus your desire, step into the circle and intone the sacred names, give offering and praise, and stare into the flames as we conjure the spirit that is David Rankine. Well, hello, David. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's been, first and foremost, I just want to say, huge fan of your work, and I'm honored to have you here to pick your brain, talk to you a little bit about, a multitude of items and topics. So it's a filled day for me to really just jump in on things that I've thought about and wondered, another great perspective of, and certainly I know the fans out there, if you're listening and you have questions for David, please feel free to leave them and we will read them off. We will engage with them and jump into whatever you guys and gals out there want to hear. But I think we should start traditionally, as I often do with my show, and really just get a feel for how your journey started. I mean, I know that you started at a very young age, which is impressive. I mean, as a young child, you were drawn to books of magic and just esotericism and dove in kind of head first and never looked back. So can you tell us a little bit about that journey and how that kind of came to fruition for you?
Okay, well, I won't do the whole I started casting spells when I was two kind of thing that people are very fond of, and I'll start with the actual magic sort of per se. When I was 14, there was like an incident in my life which caused me to reevaluate things, and the day that happened, a friend gave me a catalogue from Occultique, which was this occult supplier in England at the time. We're talking like back in 1979, and there was a whole load of books in there, and I looked at it and decided I would get some and find out more. And the first 6 books I ordered were The Key of Solomon, The Grimoire of Armadale, Sacred Magic of Abimelin the Mage, Crowley's Magic, Levi's Transcendental Magic, and Francis King and Stephen Skinner's Techniques of High Magic. So I think even at that point my hand was being guided, because there was like all serious hardcore material there.
Absolutely.
I read Techniques of High Magic, tried out all the stuff in there, and decided that was what my life was going to be about. I was going to devote my life to magic. From then on, I started doing 2 hours a day every day, meditation, doing the pentagram ritual twice a day, hexagram ritual twice a day, middle pillar, doing the stuff every day, building up the mental muscles and trying stuff out. And 16, did my first conjuration, which I look back now and think, oh my God, sometimes the naive and innocent get away with things that make you shudder when you look back on them.
Absolutely.
But it actually went surprisingly well. When I was 18, through a series of events, I ended up in a very old school magical lodge which focused on grimoire magic. It was very private, never met anywhere socially, we just got together and did the magic. And that was phenomenal training. And I had to leave because I moved away from the area, and you had to live in the area to be part of it. You couldn't commute. That was just not how they did it. You had to live within a certain radius of the temple. I left on good terms, and that had given me a great grounding. And then, from there, went on, got initiated into other traditions. But the grimoire stuff was always there whilst I was doing thing in other traditions like Selima and Wicca and other things. And it sort of kind of has, the grimoires and Qabalah have been, I suppose, the underlying themes, over the last 44 years for me.
It's very impressive, though. Like you said, right from the beginning, something drew you in, because out of all the books that you could pick in the magic genre, to pick that selection of books is some heavy work there. Like you said, for a young 14-year-old mind, trying to absorb, Aleister Crowley and trying to absorb Eliphas Levi and those names, that's a deep read even for someone much older. So, what were you thinking at that time period when you first started to dive into it? I mean, was it something that you were just enthralled to learn more and more, or were you kind of hesitant at first? I mean, obviously you wanted to begin your path, but when you started to really dive in and hear the complexity of the workings and the mythology and the mysticism, what was kind of going through your mind at that time?
Well, when I was younger, I had been very interested in mythology, and I said I wasn't going to do this, and I'm doing it. When I was 10, I read the Tao Te Ching, which was my favourite book of all time,
Okay.
Tao Te Ching, if you prefer to say it like that. And I also worked through Jung's works, which I found interesting in places and tedious in others. But I was a prolific reader. I was taught to speed read when I was young, because at school I was picked out as having aptitude for maths and English, so I was given extra lessons and doing stuff that was like years ahead of where I was, where people were in the curriculum. So, and I think though maths and English being my two big things, magic really appealed to me because magic has so much maths and English in it.
That structure completely pretty much on math and English, absolutely.
So, yeah, no, something just clicked when I started reading those books, and I just, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. I took the oath that's in the back of Techniques of High Magic and devoted my life to magic, and it just carried on from there.
Well, it makes sense that obviously you had an affinity towards obviously learning and jumping into magic at an early age, because you're not hearing too many 10, 11-year-olds reading Jung's work and being able to even understand at all what they're reading. And as you said, the grimoire work, at the age of 14, that separates you right there. And I mean, as I said, earlier, for the few minutes we got to talk prior to the show starting, there are several great minds that come to mind whenever I think of the modern age of grimoire renaissance and writing and getting the practitioners in their hand the work that they need to learn this lifestyle and this form of magic. And your name obviously is one of the forerunners right there in the front. I mean, you and Dr. Stephen Skinner and Joseph Peterson, you guys have an uncanny knack for what you do. I mean, it's not everybody that can absorb the material and be able to express it and translate and put it out in ways that the rest of the world can consume it and practice it. And that's something when I was, you and I started kind of interesting, because I know I listened to another interview of yours, and you said about, ordering out of one of those book catalogs. And that's actually how I started my magic journey. As I ordered books, for some reason was drawn to it and ordered books and started magic. And just like you, I did my first conjuration, just, I'm only speaking for myself here, but in just such an ignorant way that I didn't follow any of the guidelines properly. I kind of just kind of winged it, and it got results, but it also made me realize I needed to step back and really start studying this. So I took some time off from trying to do any type of conjuration, and then just read and read and read and absorbed and tried to adapt these different thought patterns. And that's whenever I started coming across people like you and Dr. Stephen Skinner many years ago. And that's why I'm so excited for tonight's show, because it changed my life. It changed my perspective of magic, changed how I understood it, and made me grow up. Because I think when I first started, I believed magic was real, but there was also the side of me like, okay, and then when it actually happened and that first conjuration worked and I encountered a spirit, it changed everything for the rest of my life. But it made me realize how ignorant I was, and saying like, oh, I need to take this more seriously and actually have validity to what I'm doing. And that's where, obviously you come in some of your cohorts. So I thank you for that, because it's been a big plus to me. And it's obviously, I'm seeing comments come in that I haven't even read yet, saying how much your work has helped others. And I'll pop those up on the screen here in a moment. But that's extraordinary. And like I said, it certainly shows in your work. I mean, as I said to the listeners at the beginning here, we're going to talk tonight about, the Grimoire Encyclopaedia, which is a well house of everything grimoire magic that you can think of. And David, I wanted to ask you, putting this together, I guess I should start. How did you take on the task of putting this together, and where is a starting point for this? I mean, obviously you had the idea in your mind that I want to put together a compendium of all grimoire magic, all associations, but where's day one? How's that start?
I mean, I mentioned in the introduction that back in, I think it's 2010, an old friend of mine, Mog Morgan, who does Mandrake of Oxford, publishing company, I was involved in magical groups with him back in the 80s, and he sent me a message, and he was like, Dave, he's one of the few people I let call me Dave. I don't like being called Dave. I prefer David, but I've known him so long that I think he has the right to do that. So I was like, he was like, Dave, I don't really get this grimoire stuff. Could you send me a précis of the major grimoires? So I did this document for him of what I considered the 30 or so most important grimoires, and a paragraph about each of them. And I think that was kind of like the seed of the Grimoire Encyclopaedia. And then as the years went by, and I saw more and more good material coming out, because one of the advantages of the grimoire traditions, we're blessed that there are so many talented scholars and practitioners, and also that there's such a positive camaraderie, which is missing in some of the other Western mystery traditions, in my opinion. That I thought, there's so much material, and I remembered, me getting into the grimoires and how lucky I was to have that training a few years in, of being in this magical lodge and having people who had been doing it for donkey's years, who knew their stuff. I thought, there's so much material that somebody needs to produce an overview of it all. And I thought, well, collating stuff together and trying to make sense of it's always been one of my favorite things. So I decided, why don't I? I've got that sort of kernel from the before. So then I started, how am I going to do it? And I'll do a chapter on each of the grimoires. I didn't have a set number in mind at first. I just started working through stuff. And after a while, I decided that 100 was a good number. I could have done more, but I went for 100 as a nice round number, because otherwise I would just would have kept going and it wouldn't have got finished. And I wanted it to be out there. And I'd done about 10, and I thought, there needs to be appendixes for this. So I then had to go, fortunately I'd only done 10. And so I went back through them, created loads of appendixes and started doing, so every time I came across a spirit, that went in the spirit appendix. Every time I came across a plant, it went in the plant appendix. Every time some materia magica, it went in there. So as I was working on a grimoire chapter, I had about 10 appendixes open that were constantly being added to. Wow. And it just, I worked on it every day, day in, day out. I'd work on it probably 2 to 4 hours a day on my regular work days when I was doing my regular 9 to 5 job. And on days when I wasn't working, I used to do 8 or 10 hours on it. I had a period where I was really ill with COVID. So on that, I was just laid up in bed on my laptop working all day for a few weeks. But yeah, I just once it started, it just kind of took on its own momentum and a life of its own. You know, when I got to about 50 or 60, I decided on 100. You know, there's others that didn't go in there, some more obscure texts, some more, other Arabic texts and things that I want to go in. So they will go in volume 3. I've got about 20 more chapters planned at the moment to go in volume 3.
Wow, that's awesome.
And
I mean,
as well as
that's crazy to think you're already at 100 and you got 20 more. That's just insane to how much that shows you folks how much knowledge lies within these grimoires that can be pulled out and synthesized. So wow. So you expect then obviously a full volume 3 at some point in the future, maybe even more.
Yeah. I mean, there's other things I want to put in volume 3 that I'm not going to talk about yet, but I'm quite excited by some realizations I've had of things that I think need to go into the next volume.
And right now, you know, folks, if you know you're planning on buying the book, understand that it is 100 chapters, as we talked about. Off the top of my head, I'd say it has to be roughly between the two of them 14 to 1500 pages. And when we talk about appendices and it being thorough, you're talking about, as David said, every time a plant came up, that's listed. There's lists of plants and when to use them. There's gemstones and when to use them as far as scrying. There is a spirit list that is just mind-bending. That's the part that really just blew my mind. I'm flipping page after page after page.
It's about 12,500 spirit names.
Yeah, I've never seen a list even come close to that type of comparison. That's synthesized like this. So that's very ambitious goal. So you didn't really plan then on writing this book. It kind of came to you just through your friend wanting a synthesis, you know, of what the grimoires really were. And then once you started doing that, came up with the idea, why don't I put out something much larger?
Yeah, something that's an overview that, particularly for people who aren't really familiar with the grimoires, that, you know, for each one, an overview of what that particular grimoire is about, what it has in it. Also, essential reading, so that if someone's drawn to a particular grimoire, they go, oh, I need to go and read this book by Joseph Peterson, or this book by Steve Savedow, or this book by Frater Atcher, or stuff, because that is just about it. You know, so it's also highlighting all the great work that all the people out there are doing, because there's a lot of, you know, really good work being done and being made available to people. And I wanted this encyclopedia to do what an encyclopedia should, which is, you know, signpost to people the other places to go further with things.
And you did that because I love how every section, as you said, does have at the bottom of it, these are the books that you should read in correlation with what we talked about in this chapter, and highlights so many great authors and so many great works. And I mean, at the beginning of the book, you have that thank you to the other people doing the great work. And it's quite a list of names. I mean, everybody from who I mentioned earlier, like Alexander Cummins, to obviously the late Jake Stratton Kent, and, you know, Frater Atcher and Arundel Overman, and all these other names that have been contributing towards the renaissance of grimoire magic. And like you said, it does what a great encyclopedia should. It gives you all of that raw meat that you need, but it also gives you all the branches of the tree that, hey, if you want more, there's certainly more than just this massive tome that you put out. And I love that. Like I said, I already have read through volume 1 in its entirety. I can't say I read volume 2 fully. I have browsed through volume 2 and am getting ready to tackle reading it word for word, and then I want to start over again with volume 1 and 2. So I got a lot of work ahead of me, as it's, like I said, and I will give you credit. It's not only a big book, lengthwise, but it is a big book. It is tall, and the printing on it's smaller but very readable. So when you open it up, every page is like 2 pages of what a lot of modern authors are doing. A lot of people using big font these days, so a 400-page book's really like a 200-page book. Not yours. You're 700 and it's like 1400, and there's 2 of them. So that's awesome. So like I said, I love reading. I'm a voracious reader, so it gave me a challenge whenever I bought both of them and they showed up. My wife's like, you got to be kidding me. I'm like, oh no, that's my next task. So thank you for that. We have some people saying, I got a comment here that said, just got David's encyclopedia 2 days ago. Life-changing stuff. Thank you for all of your hard work. And as we said, we do all thank you for that. So some questions I wanted to jump into, and I did write a couple of them down. I normally free flow, but there was a few things I wanted to go into. you know, I know it can be both a gift and a curse modern days, because we have so much technology at our fingertips now that, as you said, there's so many great authors out there. There's so many people able to jump into ancient tomes and work that just wasn't happening before. And there's a lot of access that wasn't there. But unfortunately, with so much access and so many people writing, there's so much misinformation. There's so much cloudiness that people don't know how to look through and find where their starting point is. And it leads to a lot of misdirection. And I know one of the things that you said in your book, which I heavily agree with, is it's okay to add something to the practice, but you should certainly do that before you ever take something away from the practice, and only ever take something away if you fully understand why it's there and what you're taking away. And I work a lot of left-hand path modalities. I've always been a left-hand path practitioner. And what I find in my arena of things is a lot of people that just have absolutely no idea of what they're talking about. They instantly, I'm removing angelic names. I'm removing the barbarous names. I'm not using a triangle of manifestation. I'm not using a circle of protection or a vehicle of operation. And they just throw everything out like the baby with the bathwater. And I guess it's to be anarchist and be rebel and, I don't do anything Abrahamic or anything like this. But they don't understand that you can look past the lens of Abrahamic religion, or you can look past angel names being offensive to daemon names, which it's not, and look at what it really is and why it's there. And as we said earlier, mathematics, I mean, resonance of words have binary code behind them, and when you're using them, it helps restrain the spirits that you're working with, and there's reasons for them being there. So a question that I want to ask throughout your research of all these different grimoires, one thing I see a lot of people throw out when it comes to ritual these days in the left-hand path of things is the circle. And that's one thing that I've made changes myself. There's things I've eliminated or added over time. One thing I've always kept true, at least when it comes to ritual or grimoire magic, is keeping a circle. I would ask, from your perspective, how important a circle is to ritual magic, and what you've seen going through all of these different grimoires, how pretty much all of them have linked a circle of some sort, and very different circles, but all have circles of manifestation to use as your vehicle of operations. What can you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. As you say, pretty much every grimoire, one of the linking features is the magic circles. And apart from anything else, it's the protection aspect apart from anything else. Because if you do a conjuration, there's no guarantee you're just going to, assuming the thing you want turns up, and there's no guarantee that's going to happen, but it also can attract other stuff. You can get what I often call astral garbage, low level like larvae and entities, which can attach themselves to you if you don't have something to protect you. The spiritual hygiene of working in a magic circle, it's essential. That's why, above anything else, why you have the circle. It's to demark, you are inside this place which has been consecrated and will protect you. You have put the work into making that a solid protection. It's drawn out, you've gone over all the names with the tip of your sword, vibrating them, drawing the symbols, etc., activating that circle as a protection from everything, not just what you're trying to call, but anything else that might be attracted. So for me, the circle is absolutely essential.
I agree, and you made a very good point, and it's something that I used to try. I don't do it so much anymore, but I would try to tell people, it's fine if you want to have a left-hand path perspective. It's fine if you want to worship these beings, I suppose, if that's the path that you want to go on. But the problem with that is people will say, well, I don't use a circle because I find it to be offensive to the daemon that I'm calling. Well, that's ridiculous to begin with. But second, they don't understand, you just nailed it, the astral garbage, the larva that will come, that is not a part. So even if you believe that you are calling Belial and you have honor for this spirit and you're working with him directly, what about the things that come when conjuring this spirit that isn't something that you have any reverence or respect for, that will attach itself to you, which will change your life, which can make you sick, cause psychological disorders, that you can't fight against unless you have this separation, and your circle is that separation of macrocosm and microcosm, and it's your world, it's your vehicle of operation. And I've tried to express this to people that as someone who does work heavily with daemon spirits in a field of reverence, I still have always used the circle because it keeps away from that, as you said, at least in ceremonial magic. I do work other traditions, which we'll talk a little bit about, the African diasporic traditions, because I want to talk a little bit about how grimoires have seeped into some of those workings. But I work Kimbanda, and I don't use a circle for Kimbanda because they don't use circles.
Yeah.
And that it's good to work, as you said in your book, the system that you're working, work that system. If you have another system, it's okay to do outside of that, but your mind needs to be focused that you can't blend them, you can't mix match and flip flop whatever you want. Work the system the way the system should be worked. And if you work another system that doesn't have a circle, so be it. But there's reasons in different types of spirits, and the Ishus and Pombagiras of Kimbanda are not the daemons of the Lemegeton. So thank you for that elucidation on there of why. And then, like I said, the astral parasites that people don't often think about, that are very, very real. In fact, they're usually more apt to show up than the spirit that you're conjuring.
Yeah, and another thing, I think this idea that it's disrespectful, I find really bizarre. One thing that I've noticed in my experience is, if you're conjuring up some sort of spiritual creature, they're actually more likely to respect strength on the part of the person conjuring them. And not having the circle there isn't an act of strength, it's an act of folly. That creature will actually respect that you have created a good, solid magical circle. It shows you have some ability. They're more inclined to deal with you because, hey, this guy who's conjured me knows what he's doing, or she knows what she's doing. I think it actually has the opposite effect. I think that having a good magic circle helps create a good basis of opening up dialogue with whichever spirit you may be, calling up.
I agree, because it's like if you're on the plains of war and you go to another soldier and you're not wearing any armor and have no sword, no nothing, I mean, you're an easy target and they're not going to respect you. But when you show up to battle with armor on and you're plated and you're ready, as you said, they're looking at you like, oh, okay, he is someone to listen to, he's someone to respect, and you can respect the spirit and they'll respect you back. But when you do have no circle and you're removing things from the conjuration, you're allowing this very dangerous force into your ritual chamber with no protection and no armor on. And it's not like, oh, well, I respect him and he's going to take care of me. There's a good chance it's going to destroy your life. And that's how that works. And I mean, I've been big on experimental magic over my life, and I have tried. And one story I'll tell folks, which I've never told before, I don't believe on the show, is I did a conjuration of murmur and I didn't use anything. It was just a straight conjuration without, I still used a circle. I didn't use a lot of the names. I didn't follow proper procedure. What ended up happening is, over the next several months of my life, I became obsessed with bones. Now, he obviously is a necromantic spirit, but I mean, I always collected oddities. I always collected curios. I lost my mind. I went insane and dropped thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars in a very short amount of time. I bought a house worth of bones, pretty much, is how much money I spent. And I realized at one point that I became obsessed, that this spirit was attached to me, or a larva of some sort, but I believe it was definitely the influence of the spirit. And I had to do some heavy work to remove that influence from my life. And as quickly as it came, once I was able to properly get rid of that influence, all of a sudden my love for bones went back to what it always was. Oh yeah, bones are cool, great. But it wasn't obsessed. I mean, I was obsessed. I was sitting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and reading things about bones and looking at auctions for oddities, and just couldn't go to sleep. I didn't even realize how crazy I'd become because I was so absorbed by this essence. So as David said, I mean, there are reasons that they are there. You might have honor and respect for the spirit, but if you don't follow the proper procedures, it might not have honor or respect for you and destroy you, like I said. So don't spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on bones, folks. Now, one of the things I wanted to jump into is, you said about, obviously, the proper procedures. You mentioned in the book something that I really liked and resonate with, which is confession. And I think a lot of people would say confession. I mean, what do you mean confession? Am I going to talk to a priest? No, folks. What David was talking about is self-confession. And I think that is a very important thing because, as you said, you bear the weight of responsibility for what you have done. Because so many people want to walk around on this pedestal and walk around like they are something of high importance when they're not. When you take account for what you have done and you say it out loud and you own up to it, there's a strength there that you can't get otherwise. And that allows you, as you said in the book, to go in very clear-headed and do the procedure properly without being weighed down from your past transgressions. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, as in addition to what you've just mentioned from what I said, there's also the aspect of ego that is held in place with confession, because I don't go with the idea that you shouldn't have an ego. I think that's nonsense. You have to have an ego. We live in a society where you interact with people. Ego is an essential part of that. But for me, part of magical training is you train your ego. The point of all of these exercises and things you do is like, ego is like a prepubescent teenager. I want this, I want that, I want. And the more magical discipline you have, the more you can actually harness the ego and make it work with you rather than against you. And confession is incredibly important for that aspect of humility, of keeping the ego in place. You stay true to your purpose and you don't end up in a position where you're doing things for the wrong reason. So, yeah, I think the confession aspect of it, people some people have a knee-jerk reaction to that, like, oh, I don't want to do that, oh, it's too reminiscent of my Christian past, blah, blah. But the point of it is not that. The point of it is to clear yourself out and to go in there in the best possible state. By the same context, having done the work to train your mind, your powers of visualization, concentration, etc., obviously are a good thing to have done before doing grimoire magic. You can just jump into grimoire magic without having done other things, but if you have other magical training, that can be a great boon of going into working the grimoires, that you've got other experience that you bring into it, as long as it's with an appreciation that the grimoires do have their own mechanics. And as we've both said, you don't mess with the mechanics of a system until you are fluid with that system. You understand why it works and what you can do. If you had a car engine and you're not a mechanic, you don't just start playing around with the engine. It doesn't work. You either get a trained mechanic to do it, or you go and train yourself so that you will be able to, in the future, fix that engine. And once you can fix the engine, then you know what to do. But until then, you're likely to make a mess of things.
Well, what I find strange is, like I said, and I have no problem talking shit on a lot of people within my own realm of, like I said, diabolism and left-hand path. You have people that will say their procedures of what they're doing is grimoire magic, but it's not grimoire magic. It might be ritual magic. You are performing a ritual. There's a difference, folks, between ritual magic and ceremonial or grimoire magic. If you were removing all barbarous names, circles, triangles, angel names, correspondences, and you're just summoning a spirit with a demonic N and a sigil and things of that nature, it still has a potency. I have done it and still do those types of practices as a separate practice from grimoire magic. But it's not grimoire magic. And I see so many posts of people talking about doing grimoire magic. And I'm like, but what grimoire is that from? And if it's from a modern one that someone just put together, it's a little bit different. There has to be a defined line between the two of them. There can be modern grimoires that are still potent. Where do you find that defining line of what makes, because obviously, if you look at anything from Solomonic texts to the Heptameron to the Sworn Book of Honorius and everything in between, we're talking ancient work. How does that translate to someone who maybe doesn't resonate with that but wants to do a grimoire style magic? Can there be proper procedures written today in the light of these books and still be a contender with these ancient tomes? So in essence, could someone write something now that is a grimoire text, true grimoire magic, and still compare to the ancient tomes?
Absolutely. I think if they have the experience and the knowledge, that that is totally something that could be done. I mean, Jake did like the Sworn and Secret Grimoire, which was a good example of someone with that experience and knowledge. And Jake was doing this stuff for decades as well. He really knew his stuff. I mean, I knew him from back in the 80s when we were both on the Phalemic scene over here. And Jake was always one of the people who was pushing the boundaries and trying stuff. And there was he, with the Sworn and Secret Grimoire, has done exactly that. He took something that actually wasn't done that well and turned it into something better. The tutorial was a mess. It was like it's just not a really very workable piece. It's a modern forgery, basically. And so Jake took that and turned it into something in modern, as a grimoire that is workable now and is a good sort of introductory text of practice for people who don't have familiarity with grimoires. And it's as valid as something like you say, like the Heptameron or the Key of Solomon.
He was a powerhouse. I mean, it was a true loss to the magic community with his passing, because not only was he amazing at what he did, his personality and his unfiltered, no nonsense approach, I guess you could say, for anybody that knows Jake Stratton Kent out there, he said what was on his mind without any worry what anybody thought. And I love that. And I respect that's how I've always been. If I offend you, that's too bad, because I'm going to say what I think, within reason. But Jake did that. And I love that about him. And his work is profound, and I know it's influenced so many people out there. And someone I know that I find to be very influential as well is Frater Akar and his work, and it's heavily influenced by Jake Stratton Kent. And I'm glad to hear you say that. I wanted the listeners to hear it from you and not from me, that there is still workable magic that can be made today that is powerful as ancient tomes, but it has to be well thought out, and there has to be reason for what is done. I will express that to the day I die, that there has to be reasons. You can't just create a magical system the next 3 weeks and say that is of potency unless it can be done again and again and work. Now, one of the things I wanted to go over too that I think is often left out by a lot of practitioners is, you said there's a lot of people that want to contribute the confession, for example, to Christian faith and say, well, I don't want to be a part of any of that. I've always, as a diabolist, I've always said that I think, as I mentioned earlier, it's one of the strengths to be able to own up to you, whatever it is you do. When I triumph, I know I'm the reason that I triumphed. When I fail, I know I'm the reason that I failed. And there's potency in that. A second part of that, though, that I think people look at it like, ritual consecrated baths and purification and blessings of myself before ritual. I notice people that will follow grimoire magic, but skip that step, which baffles my mind, because I think that is one of the most important things you could do going into ritual, because spirits can smell us, folks, and they will actually make mention to this. You might not stink, but if you don't bath before ritual, they might make mention, and it has happened before. You should be consecrated. Plus, it empowers your body. It consecrates your body just as you would a tool in ritual, which you should also do before magic. David, speak to us about kind of the thought of ritual consecrated baths and why they're so important to magic and the consecration of tools.
Yeah, I mean, in the practice chapter that's at the beginning of the book, I really stressed this because, I used the term of magical momentum, of that build up to reach a critical mass of all of the things put together to succeed. And the purification at the beginning is an essential part of that. As you say, you are preparing your body. It's part of the process of purification of body and mind through the baths, the confession, etc., to get you into that one-pointed focus that is the place you need to be at to do conjuration. And likewise, consecrated tools, you wouldn't just grab something off the shelf that might be dirty, that's not clean. So things have to be spiritually clean as well as physically clean. This is essential. And as you say, there are instances of spirits smelling things. I mean, that's the whole point of the foul-smelling things, to drive spirits away. And like William Lilly, in his autobiography, talked about this magician who conjured up demons for audiences, and he would do it when he was drunk, and the spirits would complain about his drunkenness and that he smelled because he didn't bathe. The smell is, the fragrance thing is a key thing with working with spirits. They like nice smells. interestingly, it's the smell they like. It doesn't have to be the smoke. That's the point I made in the book as well. From that point of view, in the modern age, oil burners can work just as well and not produce loads of smoke. So if you've got chest problems or asthma or stuff, you can still get the fragrance to achieve that effect without having lots of billowing smoke everywhere. I'm a great believer that magicians use the technology of the age, and there's no reason that we can't update some of the grimoire stuff with things that are equivalent, like I say, for example, oil burners rather than incense. Also, oil burners won't set off smoke alarms, which if you've got sensors,
and they're easier on the eyes too. They're easier on the eyes because I will tell you, if you're trying to scry and you're burning, if you have charcoal incense and you're burning, opal or any different type of incense, and you have a lot going, and you're trying to stare at that scrying mirror for a while, and your eyes start to feel like you have pepper spray in them, and they're burning because the smoke. Oil won't do that, and that's very. You mentioned in the book, normally you're gonna have 2 or 3 people in part of your rituals, preferably. But if you are a solar practitioner like me and I'm doing everything myself, folks, if you are burning, your eyes are on fire, you're going to have a hell of a time focusing on seeing the spirit in a crystal or in a obsidian mirror if you have billowing smoke. So I love the fact that you added the oil factor to the book, because that really, as you said, it's a reflection of the age. That wasn't possible back then, but it is very possible now. So that's one of those things where there's a lot of purists out there that would say, oh, no, it has to be. And I mean, I have a problem with ritual purists because I believe to an extent you need to follow those guidelines. But I also need to know to some folks, they are so hooked into being a purist that they overlook things like that. If the scent is what does it. As you said, it either brings them in or it'll drive them away. And you're getting the same sense without the effect of the smoke.
I mean, I can appreciate ritual purity to a degree, but you can't let it ossify a system.
Yes.
It has to continue to progress. And if you look at the grimoires, you look at the first ones like the Swamba Quinorius, and those early ones, they're very heavily angelic. The earliest ones, you get the Virgin Mary. She kind of largely disappears, for example, out of the grimoires within a couple hundred years. The processes get simpler. You get more demons and other spirits in them as the grimoires come through. It's a natural progression, and we can't just go, okay, there's this amazing grimoire stuff, and yes, they are amazing, but at the same time, they're not going to stay frozen in time. We live in this age of unparalleled access to information, which, back in the Renaissance, you wanted a copy of a manuscript, you had to find somebody who had it and get it copied. You couldn't just go on Google and find that some museum library has put it on there for you to access and just be able to look at just like that. Thank you very much. Or buy a book where somebody's translated it for you. So we live in a time where there's unparalleled access to the information, and things need to keep moving, but moving in a way that maintains what works in the systems.
Correct. And I love the fact that, too, you mentioned one thing that I never really heard anybody talk about before, but it makes perfect sense. Folks, if you have a grimoire out there, your own personal grimoire I'm speaking of, and you're jotting down notes from ritual and things that you do during rituals that you notice work, doesn't work, so forth, you're usually going to jot down the things that stand out to you. But the things that are absolutely common sense to you, you don't jot down because you just already know them. Unless you're planning on having other people read it, you don't put it down. Well, that's how these books were. A lot of the grimoires that we have weren't originally probably planned to become famous and be known. Some of them were personal grimoires that eventually got leaked. And I love how you had said in the book that there are things missing from some of them because they didn't think to write them down because they were so second nature to them, but might be very vital to the operation, that someone taking it word for word is not realizing that there's pieces missing. Speak on that if you don't mind, because as you compared multiple grimoires, you're seeing, as you said, things that are congruent amongst all of them, things that have, certain ones congruent and other ones completely missing. Do you feel that there was just a lot of things left out because in that day and age, they just knew that needed to be a part of ritual operation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you look, for example, at the Key of Solomon, they've got all the consecration stuff that's in the Key of Solomon. There are so many Key of Solomon manuscripts. We're talking about when Steve and I were doing Vertical Key of Solomon, we found, including, I suppose, Hagmantias, over 150. There's nothing else that comes close to that, apart from the Ars Notoria. A lot of these grimoires, there's maybe 1, 2, up to half a dozen copies. Most of them only 1 or 2, or even just 1. So to me, I think the Key of Solomon is kind of expected, if you were doing other grimoire stuff, that you'd probably had or had access to a Key of Solomon, so you knew the consecration stuff was in there. So you then wouldn't put it in your own one because you already knew those techniques. That's why I did that chapter on practice and my own sort of the sequence of what I think all the steps that need to be gone through, so that people can see a working map, if you like, of the start to finish of conjuration. I wasn't saying this is the only way to do it, but just trying to say to people, these are all the steps. Your grimoire might not have all of them in, but it doesn't mean you don't need to do them. You want all of this to achieve the maximum magical momentum to have the best chance of success. And at the end of the day, even if you do everything right and you've consecrated your tools and you've got the right timing and everything, there's no guarantee the spirits can turn up. They don't always turn up. You can do everything right and they might not turn up. And also, you have to bear in mind that it can be an endurance, like a marathon thing. You can do conjurations and they can take hours. They're not necessarily going to turn up the first time you do the conjuration. You might have to repeat it a number of times. I've done conjurations where I've done it and I've not really had a good result, and I've gone back afterwards. What did I do wrong? What steps did I? Was there things I didn't do? Like, I'll give one example. I got a bit cocky at one point because I'd had some good successes, and I was doing quite a big angelic conjuration, and I only did 3 days of preparation with the purification and stuff beforehand, and the bathing and confession and stuff, and it didn't work. Normally, I would always do 7. 7 full days. I only did the 3. It didn't really work. I got a little bit of reaction. Certainly wasn't from that. Maybe it might have been a very minor one sent along from the angel, which I didn't get the connection. And I think that was due to laziness on my part. So that was like a really good object lesson, because I had worked with that particular angel before and had good contact, but I had got lazy. You can't take things for granted. You have to keep your standards up of the practice and the effort that you put in your preparation and your purification and stuff.
That's one of the biggest things I think that people do skip out. Putting confession and all the other things aside in ritual baths, I think that the fasting is one thing that people don't do because it's the hardest. And I believe in suffering for success, I guess you could say. And I don't think a lot of people do. They don't want to be hungry. They don't want to be abstinent. They don't want to do these different steps that are not comfortable. But it's not about being comfortable, folks. It's about doing what's needed to be able to get a successful operation. And, I like how you said, the food one is the one that I understand, as you put, I understand that, maybe a day before or so, you go to just strictly drinking apple juice. Give yourself something so that your blood sugar is where it needs to be and you're not eating, you are on an empty stomach, which is very important. But one of the biggest things I think people want to skip out on is the retention of sexual fluid. I don't want to go a week without being intimate. Well, that's fine, folks, but you're probably not going to have near as potent of a reaction. That is the one thing I will say, personal observations, that if you retain that energy, it'll come out in ritual. But if you do not retain it and you let it out the night before a ritual, you don't have that powerful of an experience. I've always compared it to a wine cooler and moonshine. I always say you can probably have the wine cooler every time you do an operation, some type of effect, some type of feeling of atmospheric change in the ritual chamber. But is that all you're looking for? Are you only looking for that wine cooler, or are you looking for the moonshine? If your purpose is to go in there and have a reaction and get a feeling from it, do you just want to have something that's a slight buzz, or do you want to really get the good stuff? Yeah. And for some of us, we want the good stuff, so we go all in. And I love that you explained that and how you did lay out a path working of, this is how from start to finish to set up an operation. Because for a lot of neophytes getting into ritual magic, there's so many different sources, as we said. They're trying to read the Keys of Solomon, and they're reading the Sworn Book of Honorius, and they're jumping around. They're like, where do I go from here? And this one says this. You lay it out that this is the structure of the operation, and you can do it as needed. So I really appreciate you doing that for the viewers and the readers out there. I wanted to jump back a moment. You had said something that made me just think of a question, that the angelic invocations and evocations are usually much more extreme and much more detailed than the demonic. Do we think that that's just because things got simplified over time, or do we think it's the energies that we're working with? It angels or angelic currents seem to require a lot more catering to them to get them to come through and work appropriately, whereas demonic spirits closer to our realm, closer to our resonance, seem to want to work with us without the huss and fuss. I mean, I've always, and I agree with that. It seems like you're jumping through hoops a lot of times with angelic workings to really get that strong connection, and they're usually not as forthcoming. They'll get the job done, but Daemons seem to often want to communicate. They're easier to work with. They don't require the huss and fuss. So what are your thoughts on that? Do we think that grimoires just kind of simplified over time in general, or do we think it's because the demonic grimoires, such as like the Virum and things, it's not, you're working with an energy that is more happy to work with you?
I think it's more the latter. I mean, with angels, they tend to usually have a very specific function, and it is this very exalted kind of energy. So it's like you've got to focus down to like laser sharp. So the preparation and purification stuff is absolutely essential. And as you say, I had the same experience. They will only give you the bare minimum. They will tell you, they'll answer your questions, and that's all you're going to get. They're not going to be chatty. With the daemons, they are far more inclined. It's like they're more general purpose. They usually have a wider range of where they can operate. It's not just I have this set function, this is the only thing I do. There's a range of skills, if you like, they normally have, and they are, I'm saying, they do tend to be more willing to communicate and engage. So yeah, I think there is a definite difference there between the two, and that's part of the thing of deciding at the beginning, what are you after? I did an angelic conjuration one time to track a manuscript down. And the angel came, and I said, it's in this place. I said, but I've looked in that library, it wasn't there. It's there, it's mislabeled, go back. And boom, it was gone. So, okay, I went back, sure enough, it had been mislabeled, the manuscript was there. So the angel gave me the right information, but that was it. It just came, answered my question, and went again.
Yeah, they don't seem to, I don't want to say that they feel it's an inconvenience, but they almost, I think, sometimes feel it's an inconvenience. Like when we do conjure an angelic spirit, they're just, they give you what you need, and they're just like, okay, I'm leaving again. Where it's almost, and I by no means mean disrespect to the demonic spirits, but I almost feel like I can consider them more of like a dog. A dog wants to be your friend. It wants to come around. It wants to lay in your lap. It wants to connect with you in some form or fashion. Cats, not so much. Cats usually just do their own thing. And I feel like that's kind of how angels are, where they'll give you the answer, but I mean, you can't really understand them. They're not going to chat with you. They do how they do, and I think so many people have a misconception of angelic spirits. And yeah, I don't have a whole lot. I've always stuck more to the demonic side, but the experiences I have had with angelic experience has always been interesting. Let's say that. Very, very quick, very quiet. Like you said, not chatty, just to the point and done.
Yeah, I
but
mean,
go ahead.
Spirits, planetary intelligence is more chatty, also easier. When people say what should I start with, I will usually say direct them to like the Olympic spirits or the planetary intelligences. I think before you go into angels and demons, way better, way easier to get in and get good results with. Because like I say, we both had that experience. Once you have that first encounter with a spirit, it changes everything for you. It's certainty, not faith. You no longer think, oh, maybe this stuff is real. It's like, whoa, this stuff is real. It's out there, and I can interact with it. It's just changed your universe forever. So if the first conjuration you're going to do, I really strongly recommend, say, preferably Olympic spirits, but also planetary intelligence is good. That's
No, I think that's great
what
advice.
I say to people.
No, I agree with you. I think that's strong advice because otherwise it might throw you for a loop. Because I didn't follow that advice. Like I said, my first time I went straight to demonic evocation and it worked, and I wasn't ready for that. So when it actually happened, I'm like, oh shit! Like I wanted this, or at least I thought I did, but I don't know what to do now. And there's nothing more embarrassing to yourself than when what you call shows up, and then you're like, now what do I do? Because you're wasting everybody's time at that point. I have a question here from someone who just left. It says, is there a reason that they won't tell you that I'm not quite sure how he worded it. Is there a reason they won't tell you because you will destroy yourself? I think what that's asking, is there a reason that if you're doing it wrong, the spirits don't necessarily tell you and will let you fall into error? What is your take on that?
I was reading that as referring to the angels. Yeah, I mean, angels are, I think it's just they have a job to do. And so they will just give you what is required. They just do their job and they're gone again. Just look at the name, angelos, messenger, daemon, intelligence. The difference is there just in the basics of the name. So yeah, I don't think it's because you'll destroy yourself. I think it's just because they're busy, and two, I don't want to say that angels are disdainful of humans because that's the whole pride and fall thing, but it's just for them it's a distraction. Like, okay, you've called me, you need this, here it is. Okay, I'm gone.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Me from doing my job. Whereas with a demon, it's like, you want to chat? Okay, let's party. If they've actually turned up and they're there, then and it's like from there, possibly building up the relationship with them. I mean, one thing that does make me cringe somewhat is I've had people come up to me and say, I did this week and I did a conjuration every day. And I'm like, how the hell did you do that? Because surely you did a week's preparation for the one. So then the next day you're doing another one. Where's your preparation for that?
Exactly.
It's a different spirit. What respect is there for that spirit? Do you think you're going to get results from all this? Plus, they're not Pokemon cards that you collect. You don't need to do all the spirits. You work with a spirit that is relevant for you to work with. That there's reasons. And you want you want to get something from working with that spirit.
And we've talked about that on the show in the past where, and you said exactly what I've said, Pokemon. I've actually made that exact comparison where, got to catch them all. It's not like that, folks. I've met so many people that have told me, well, I'm working my way through all 72 of them. Why? I mean, I don't understand the necessity or why anybody would want to take on that task, because it should be. And in the years I've worked through the grimoires, I've worked with maybe 15 spirits. That's it. I usually have stuck to about 5. That's for the purposes I've needed. Never really cared to venture on beyond that because I don't need to meet them all. No. There's no need to meet them all. If they're taking care of the needs that they are charged with and they're making that happen, then that's all I need. And yes, there might be 3 other spirits that could do the same charge, but if I've already formed a relationship, and that's the key, formed a relationship, then that's what you have. But people will say, and you, 2 things I want to point out there. People say, well, doing this spirit this week and this one next week and this one. You don't have any time to actually get the job done because it does take a relationship. It's like knocking on your neighbor's door. You go ask a favor. If you've never talked to him before, chances are he's not going to do it. But if you go over his house a bunch of times, you bring him gifts, you make offerings to him, and you form a relationship and say, hey, can you do a favor for me? Yeah, I'll do that. It's about forming that bond. They're going to do for you a favor whenever you need it if they like you. But if you just call them out of the blue and never spoke to them before and say, hey, I charge you with this, 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 and this, it's probably not going to happen, or not going to happen in a way that you want. But you don't need to call every neighbor on the block if you have that neighbor next door. It's your best friend. So I think people need to have a different perspective. And I think a lot of modern authors have done this to the culture, where it is about how badass you are, how many you can call. And like you said, if you're doing a conjuration today, and then you're doing one tomorrow, and then you're doing one on Thursday, I got to question that because, as you said, David, I mean, it's a lot of preparation to actually have that experience. And I think what happens is a lot of practitioners aren't actually contacting the spirit. They're contacting a facet of their own mind.
Yeah, there's a
And
lot of
they're
ego
getting,
dialogue.
yeah, they're getting what seems to be paranormal. They're getting experiences. They might even have phenomena, like I said, that it seems wild. And I contacted a spirit. He can't. No, you contacted yourself. You just didn't realize you were talking to yourself. And if you do truly consecrate everything, if you do truly purify, if you do the confessions, if you do all of the steps properly, there's a reason why some of the purists will say, if you follow this to a T, you will have a life-changing experience. But if you don't, you're going to have experiences, sure. But once again, do you want the wine cooler or do you want the moonshine? And that's you got to ask yourself. Now, I wanted to say, we were talking about angels. What kind of influence do you think books like The Sword of Moses had on further grimoires, as being a very old text and kind of portraying angels in a strange light that most people don't even realize? Because when people think of angels, they think of love and light, which isn't the case with angels. They will be messengers of death. And the Sword of Moses has multiple conjurations to kill people and to plague them. How do you think that influenced a lot of what was to come in a Christianized grimoire tradition?
I don't think it heavily did. I don't think that many people had access to material in things like the Sword of Moses. The view of angels was heavily influenced from the Christian take. Those Jewish ones, they're definitely, I think, to me, more true to how I perceive angels.
Me too.
But that, I don't think that was the way most people doing the grimoires were seeing them. I think they had more this view of, there's this Christian hierarchy of this angel does this and is under this, and we've got the 9 orders. And I don't think that many people had access to it to be heavily influenced by it. I mean, I think the Sword of Moses is a really interesting text.
It's damn near impossible to work, though. I started to mess with it and I backed off because I can't repeat those chain of names.
There's a really good
I can do
book
names.
that came out recently, which I mentioned in the chapter on the Sword of Moses that came out in the last couple of years. There's a good book on working with the Sword of Moses out now.
Yeah, I believe Harold Roth put that out, if that's the one
That's
you're
the
talking
one.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had him on last season. We talked about that. Great guest, great book, folks, if you haven't checked it out. Yeah, because I tried to do the previous translation of it years ago when I was a teenager. I found it and was trying to go. I was incomprehensible. I'm like, it's a cool thought, and it's cool to show these angels in this light, which is more, as you said, in the light of how I believe they were. But there's no way anybody could work that. Where now Harold has taken it away, you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I want to add, one thing as a side note here, folks, like I said, if you look at a lot of people saying they don't want to call on angels because they think it's disrespectful to bring this light being against a daemon. One thing you have to understand is if you at least go by David and I's perspective of angels, the angel is probably more terrifying than the demon. So when you call the angel, it's not calling this real righteous being to subdue this dark evil being. It's calling this monstrosity of terror to subdue this demon, because angels are terrifying, and I have had some pretty terrifying experiences with them. Now I want to ask a question because it's an interesting take, and it's been used before. Poke Runyon made this very popular, and Poke brought a couple things to modern occultism that I don't want to say he brought it to it, but he reemerged it. In his book, The Magic of Solomon, he talked about correlating the Decans and the 72 Shem Hemephoresh angels with the 72 goetic demons of Solomon. What is your thoughts on the lining up of the Shem angels with the 72 goetic demons and the Decans? Do you find weight in that, or do you find that that's a reach?
Oh, you've picked a topic that's quite a hot potato. Obviously, the Goetia of Dr. Rudd has the 72 Shem angels lined up with the Goetic spirits. And people go, oh, that's so wrong. No, you can't do that. It's like, so you're telling me it's okay to experiment with stuff now and find things that work with you, but it wasn't okay for somebody who was actually working grimoires and in a group, you can tell from his writings, if you work for all of Rudd's material, he was clearly working in a group of magicians, to do something and find that it works for them and then carry it on. I don't, there's a certain hypocrisy there.
Yeah.
The people doing it back then are not allowed to make suggestions because it offends the sensibilities of somebody today. Well, tough crap. The fact is that the 72 Shem Angels, if you choose to do that with the Goetic spirits, does work. I've done Goetic conjuration without when I started, in my earlier days, in the lodge and other places. And I tried it with the Shem Angel thing. And the Shem Angel thing definitely works. And in all the times I've done it, I've never had to use the cursing side of things. I'm not a big fan of the whole constraining and cursing of demons. Happily, I've never needed to do that in all my magical career, which I'm very pleased about, because I think you actually want a sort of a healthy relationship with a spirit, and cursing is not going to help engender that. But the fact is that, like it or not, that connection, I mean, you obviously went, 72, let's see if they match up, does work. And for somebody who has never done Goetia before, actually having the Shem Angel there as a moderating influence on the Goetic spirit is a good thing to do. It's going to make it a lot less hazardous for somebody doing the Goetia. I'll say the Goetia rather than Goetia, because obviously we know from Jake's work and others, Goetia is much more than that. It's not the book, but we're talking about the Goetia of the 72 Goetic spirits from the Lemegeton. That it does work. At the end of the day, the question is, does it work? Whether you like it or not and are offended by it, well, that's irrelevant. The fact is that as a piece of magical technology, the Shem Angels with the Goetic spirits works. And having that, the dual-sided seal, so you've got the Shem Angel facing inwards towards your heart, protecting the heart, with the spirit seal facing it so it can see its own seal. It's an extra layer of magical protection. And as I say, it works. So whether you choose to work it or not is up to you. But for me, it's a valid magical technology that works and that makes it, I think, safer and more peace of mind for people coming into working that particular grimoire.
Now, a question on that, because it's something that I've pondered before, and I would love to hear your take on it. Do you believe that the Shem Angels and the Goetic demons are the same beings, but different vibrations of the same being? So almost like different deific masks of the same current. So when you find the one-to-one counterpart, the angelic side is its higher vibrational self and the daemon its lower vibrational. So when you pair them together, you are in essence bringing the spirit fully together in its true nature of higher and lower. And that's why it's stabilized out. So you're not teeter-totter to one side or the other. You bring it together in equilibrium and balance. Do you find any validity to that? Because I've talked about that in the past, where there is a thought that they are the same 72 beings. They're just one-to-one counterparts.
I don't personally see them as being the same beings. The spirit list of the 72 in the Goetia formed over a period of a couple of centuries. Those Shem Angels had been there for a long time before that, rather than the spirits that got put together into that spirit list of the 72. I think they work because of the nature of the power of the Shem Angels being sort of balancing that power of the Goetic spirits. But for me personally, I don't believe that they are, I think, a direct thing. I think if they'd been put in a different order, it still would have worked. The order of the Shem Angels will remain constant, but that order that is there, I'm not suggesting you switch around and stick a different angel with a different spirit. I'm just saying that for me, I think it works because of the nature of the beings in there. I don't think it's like a direct correlation of higher and lower. I mean, it's something I have also considered, because there are whole aspects is like, there's arguments, for example, that Lucifer and Michael being aspects of the same. That they
I've
are
heard it before
the
as
same
well.
I mean, I veer more towards the, there's very interesting Kabbalistic stuff talking about Michael and Metatron being the same being. There's like a whole load of stuff on that, which is very interesting. But I don't make that, for me, I don't make that connection of the Shem angels being, like, if you like, different aspects of those 72 in the Goetia.
No, thank you. I really wanted to see, like I said, your take and understanding of that, and that is interesting, folks. Something out there to certainly ponder on and look into that if you're not familiar out there of the Goetia of Dr. Rudd that you and Stephen Skinner put out together, the rework of that, which is a great book. It talks about that. Poke Runyon has talked about that, like I said, in his system, and one of the claims he made, which yes and no, he talked about rediscovering using a black scrying mirror in evocation to see the spirits, which I think there is some validity to that, but obviously he didn't discover it. He rediscovered it because there was drawing spirits into crystals, which has existed long before Poke Runyon did. What are your thoughts on using a scrying mirror as the medium base? I know within the grimoires, there's hundreds, dozens, if not hundreds of different ways of scrying and doing divinatory acts. What is your thoughts on using specifically a scrying mirror to see the spirit in full visible appearance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's an obsidian mirror that was used by Dee in the British Museum in London. I've used an obsidian mirror a lot. It's one of my main sort of tools, or it was. Well. I haven't replaced mine yet because unfortunately it got trashed in the fire that happened a couple of years ago. That
I'm sorry to hear that.
Destroyed the flat that we were living in. But so either that or a crystal ball. I still have the crystal ball. I think the obsidian mirror is a great medium for spirit contact. I'm a big fan of obsidian mirrors, and again with them that goes back into other cultures. Like you have the whole Aztec thing, Tezcatlipoca. I mean, his name literally means mirror that smokes. That process of the mirror smoking before you have your vision in the mirror. So we see them being used in other cultures for spirit contact as well. Yeah, I love the obsidian mirror as a. Like I say, it'll be one of my two choices, that or crystal ball, for when I'm like doing the conjuration into it.
I think that's the best way for most regular people to experience the sight of a spirit, because there are people out there, and I'm not one of them, that will say, I see them to visible appearance in front of me in my own eyes. I've seen them in vision through meditation. I've seen them in trance work. I've seen them in scrying. I don't see those spirits. I'm not that sensitive to be able to see them in actual visible appearance. So for me, a scrying mirror has been a wonderful way of doing so, because I can go into a trance gaze. I can go into deep states of meditative mind and hypnagogic staring, and I will see them in the mirror, and it usually works pretty phenomenally. So I always thought that to me was the most streamlined way of seeing them, because I can't seem to reach beyond that.
Absolutely. I think very few people do see them physically very often. If someone claims they're seeing them all the time, I might look a bit askance.
Full of it.
Yeah, prove it. But having that mirror or ball, as you say, as that gateway to them, you then also remove the constraint of spirits, if they do physically manifest, are not very comfortable in our environment for a long period of time. It's akin to taking a fish out of water. It's going to start dying pretty quick. That's why that you see with the spirits, normally there's whole thing of, if they manifest, they're there for an hour and then they're gone. If you have that medium, so you're contacting them and they're in their own realm, like this conversation we're having now via the internet, it's the same principle, but through a mirror to the people and the spirit in this place and you in your place. There isn't that same constraint. You can engage for a longer period of time. It's not necessarily limited to that hour, because it's quite comfortably in its home and you're in your place, and it enables you to extend that time, because you may have your list of things that you're going to talk to the spirit about or ask for that you prepared beforehand, because that way you don't forget stuff. So of course you've prepared it. That's a mistake you usually only make once. And I was guilty of it at the beginning as well.
I've been there more than once, actually. It took a few times for me to really.
But have a precise list, with lawyer eye of the questions, so that it can't. There's no wiggle room on the answers. So yeah, I think it's a must. Having it in its triangle or circle or pentagram or whatever it might be, because depending on the grimoire, it's often the second small circle for angels, and you even have like a pentagram that the crystal goes into for some of the fairy conjurations. So it's not always a triangle.
Yeah, true. And I think that's an important thing that I've seen people remove the triangle, which is strange to me because you're not giving it really a place to try to manifest. And as you said, it is hard for them to be in our environment. And I know Crawley had a lot of work that he tried to do with smoke to get them to appear in smoke. And he had a hell of a time doing it because it's not the best way of going about it. Like you said, with the scrying mirror, they're able to stay in their realm but still transmit to ours. When you're trying to get them to appear in a base like smoke or just in general, it's a really hard thing that if you do get, you're going to have to really stay in that trance state to keep them locked in long enough to get your answers. And that's draining. As you said, it might take hours to get them to show up. And then by that time, you're probably already feeling fatigued, but to be able to stay that mind locked with them, it doesn't work very well, where you don't have to be as stern with the scrying mirror because it does take often a long time. I mean, you can be in the ritual chamber, folks, for 2-3 hours, really locked into an operation. And by the time you're done, you're whooped. I mean, you're whooped that night, you're whooped the next day.
That's why I always have the day off after.
Yep, day off after. And that's what I was just going to say. And as you said earlier, when someone tells you I do it 3-4 days in a row, I call bullshit on that because I don't know how you have that stamina. You have the stamina like a grizzly bear, because next day I'm ready to just sleep or just lay around. And a great practitioner I've had on the show, Alistair Nocht, he talks about N's: eat, nest, drink, scribe. After you're done with ritual, you need to eat something, you need to get comfortable, you need to drink and rehydrate, and you need to scribe your thoughts right then and there, because by the next day, it's going to seem like a cloudy dream. Because you look back on it and you're like, I remember things happen, but now it starts to disappear. At least for me, it almost is like a dream. It'll start to kind of dissipate.
Or you start to rewrite it.
Yep, or you start to add dialogue that was not there. And I know that one thing you said that is very resonant that a lot of people overlook is the quieting the internal dialogue. You have to get to a point of oneness where you dissolve, because then you will have contact with a spirit and know without a shadow of a doubt that it is the spirit. But as we talked about earlier, it's easy to fool yourself and be talking to yourself. And that happens for a lot of people. I think most practitioners out there claiming huge feats are actually talking to themselves. So, I mean, how important was that for your work when you learned to quiet the inner dialogue, which is an extremely hard task for people to learn? But once you learn it, it's one of the most vital tools in your toolbox.
Essential. I mean, I was lucky, I suppose. When I was 21, so I've been doing like 2 hours daily practice for 7 years. I had just been in a ritual in the group I was in Oxford, and I went into like a samadhi type state, oneness with the universe. And I came out of it and I realized my internal dialogue was gone. And I started talking, and then I switched it off. And that experience had enabled me to switch the internal dialogue off at will. So, and I think that was the cumulative result of 7 years of doing this stuff and doing the meditations and visualizations and stuff every day. But since then, for the last, 37 years, I've lived my life without internal dialogue. If I want to think about something, I'll process it, I'll talk in my head. But most of the time, I've just lived with silence in my head, and it's wonderful. It makes life so much
it is
calmer. And as you say, for ritual, if it's a spirit talking to you, because otherwise there's silence. I know if it's something, or if I've started talking to myself, I know that's me, that's not the spirit. I can tell the difference. Also, when I have the spirit contact, they tend to talk in quite a different voice to my voice.
They do. Yep. It'll stand out itself just because not only the voice that you hear, but also how their cadences with talking isn't the same as yours. Yeah. And like I've never talked to myself that way before, so why would I start now? But the inner dialogue is an important thing, and I've taught students that I've had in the past that One really great way to start that process, aside from just deep meditation, is mindfulness. Step outside yourself and view your life as someone separate from you. Watch yourself go throughout the day, everything you do. Why do you do it? Why are you acting that way? Why did you say what you did? And you start to really realize your dialogue, like I said, and you, wait a second, that's kind of weird. Like I am playing a character right now, but I just viewed myself outside the character that I'm playing, and then it causes that chasm there. And once you start to crack it a little bit, it will start to grow. And that's an important thing, that if you can't separate yourself from yourself, you're going to have a heck of a time really getting into those deeper states of conjuration and connection. But you are correct. Once you find that, it's a very peaceful state to be able to just shut it off and live without constant fluttering of thoughts going on in your head. It's gone. You can turn it on and off as you please.
It helps you be more productive as well, I think. People say, how have you done written all these, etc. Well, because I can just concentrate on what I'm doing. There's no distraction. So you can get a lot more done when you don't have distractions.
Yeah, because it'll pull you every which way, especially for me, because I mean, I had ADD as a kid, and I still do it, I guess, in ways certain times, but get pulled all over the place, every single direction, and you never can focus on the thing that's in front of you because you're looking in every direction but in front of you. So when you learn to captivate that's what I started. That was the practice I did for myself, was that looking at myself outside of myself, which helped me rein all that in, which did what the medicine couldn't. As kids, they want to throw medicine at you and say, try this will help it. It didn't help it. But taking a look at myself outside myself did what the medicine couldn't, which was important. And I know that we are kind of probably out of time or running past time because we flew through, an hour and a half, which is crazy. I had so many more questions I wanted to ask you. I'll have to probably bring it back again to get you some of them. But one of the things I wanted to go over, and we briefly mentioned it earlier, is pivotal grimoires like the Virum. To me being my favorite, I would say, but they all have their own cadences. What are your thoughts on the Virum changing everything? Because it went from being more of a constraining in some sort of way to making pacts, to let's form a pack with these daemons, and bringing that aspect into the light at that point, and being just kind of a very different setup, and how they have the three kings, and Ashtaroth and Lucifer and Beelzebub, and bringing that aspect in, which was kind of different. I know that obviously in Solomonic style, you can have Orion's Paimon, Mammon, and Egan. But what are your thoughts on that aspect of the three, and obviously of the pact making?
Okay, well, that's interesting because it brings in a division that was there in the grimoires. I mean, the LBS, LBA, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Astaroth, which tend to be North and South Europe. So the LBS texts tend to be the ones that are England, Germany, and that more the northern parts of Europe, whereas the LBA tend to be more the French, Italian, that part of Europe. So grimoire, so the Verum being, Italian, French, is the LBA trinity. So I think those two, or occasionally you get LBSA and you get the four, as the ruling triumvirate with then the four kings underneath, is a really effective hierarchy. And I think that was, whoever put the Verum together. I mean, there's bits of stuff in it from Grimoire Papernorius and other texts, but it has to be, it's like a genius text, really. I mean, like you say, it's one that creates this shift that makes things more practical and doable in a way that you can engage. So yeah, I mean, the Verum for me is not actually one I've really worked a lot. I mean, a lot of people, I know people love the Verum, but for me, my focus has been more on, initially it was on more Goetia, Key of Solomon has been a big one for me, the 9 keys, and then I've sort of moved off into certain other ones that I'm not going to say. But I sort of went, demon, angel, back to demon. But the Verum, it's like a crossroads. I think it marks that things kind of came together with the Verum in a way that has made it really accessible, and it's a really key text. and Jake, was the person who really popularized it. Before that,
Yeah.
people weren't paying that much attention to it. That is one of Jake's huge contributions.
That was his baby, yeah.
And there used to be a Yahoo group that Jake and Joe Peterson ran back in the day, a long time ago now, when they still had Yahoo groups. And there was a lot of active discussion going on there about it. And again, like Jake freely giving of his knowledge and experience like he did. So yeah, I think it's one of the key ones. It really is. It was that changing point where, like you say, the pacting got taken into a more accurate model. Model isn't quite the right word, but accurate way to engage. It's not the whole, oh my God, you're selling your soul to the devil in blood. It's like it changed what people understood pacting to be.
Yep, absolutely did. It was like a legal contract. It became you were doing a legal, in essence, a legal spiritual deal with someone. But yeah, you took that element of you're selling your soul to Satan. No, I am making a verbal contract with a spirit. We are under guidelines of understanding what each of us needs to do, and that's how we're going to handle it.
It does its bit. I contribute my part, and that's really changed. I think the model of thing. I mean, something that's much more present. We were talking before the show. About Kimbanda.
Yes.
And
heavily influenced by the Viram.
The pacting in Kimbanda. Again, you pact with your Eshu or your Pompagira, and then they tend to do stuff. And if there's something, it's not their specialty, they contract out to another Eshu or Pompagira. You don't need to go and work with lots of other different Eshus and Pompagiras. It's like a much more practical model.
It is, and it just I love Kimbanda for that fact that it is a very clean system that brings together elements of all kinds of different systems into one, but is very synthesized. And there's the pact making, and as you said, they will contract out and take care of it for you. They become your mediary. You are working with them, and they take care of what's in between. And they were heavily influenced by the Viram, because as you look at Mayoral, which is their version of the Godhead, you could say, it is made of three parts. It is made of Beelzebub, it is made of Ashtaroth, and it is made of Lucifer. And those three parts make Mayoral, which oversees the seven kingdoms, the seven crossroads of Kimbanda. So the Viram heavily had bled over into Kimbanda. And I know you had mentioned in the book that the Armadale had been seen in libraries of Palamayombe. And it's interesting how the cultures kind of bleed into one another with grimoire magic and have all influenced back and forth. And I found that to be interesting in the book when you said that, because I already knew of the influence of the Viram and Kimbanda, but I didn't realize that there had to be that Armadale influence in Palamayombe, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's happened throughout the millennia. There was this cross-fertilization between things that work in different systems. No magical system, unless you're on an island in the middle of nowhere, exists in isolation. And the stuff from things like the PGM, which has ended up, influencing and going into the grimoires, for example, it's an ongoing process. And at the end of the day, magicians and sorcerers, they want to do stuff that works. They want the technology that works. And so that's where I think something like the strength of the Viram is. You have a technology that works, that has proven successful results, and that's why so many people like it.
Yeah, it takes out a lot of the clutter, which can be found in grimoires, especially like I said, if you're starting out and you don't know where to turn. There's so much confusion, and I liked when I first came across the Viram, it synthesized that for me. I says, oh wow, I kind of like that model of pact. I like the model of streamlined. I like how it's, as you said, working. If it isn't the spirit will help me get in contact with who I need to. It broke it down, all the confusion. And last two questions, if you don't mind, David. We have a listener question, then I had one question I wanted to ask. Listener question said, this is from Gary. Gary, I'll throw it up on the stage. Or up on the screen. It says, jumped in here really late. I just have one question for David. If it hasn't already been asked, how have the four kings enriched your practice? Which is interesting, Gary, because we were just talking or briefly mentioned Orion's Paimon, Amaimon, and Egan. How has that influenced or impacted your ritual, or has it?
I mean, I've worked with them in the past, but not hugely. It depends how you take the four kings. See, I have worked with a different set of four kings, by which I mean the four elemental rulers of the salamanders, the
Gotcha.
the undines, etc.
The undines. Yeah.
And I pacted with those, and so through the four pacts I have there, I've a lot of work done by elementals rather than other spirits like angels or demons. So I have not. I've worked with them a bit. But I wouldn't say that it's hugely affected my praxis or my life. I think they are spirits that need more attention, of all of them. I think I suspect in the next few years there's going to be a lot more material out there about the four.
There's a course right now, and I was trying to look up. There's another set of four that I seen, and we mentioned Poke Rungian earlier, with his Master Mandala of the Shem and all that. He used four different demonic kings. That here it is. Let's see. I had to look it up to see who he used. He uses Ziminar, Amaymon, Korsan, and Goap. As the four that he used. Now, I'm not sure where he came up with that, but he has those four that he uses. But I was going to say Alexander Cummins has a course out right now, folks. I think it's $250 and the reason I know that is that he's going to be a guest later in the season, and I was looking up some of his courses and stuff, so I had some background of what he offers, because he's extended his list of courses tremendously over the last year or so. He has a course on the four kings, and it's a full procedure from start to finish of how to work with the four of them. So if anybody out there, Gary, if you're interested in looking into more of the four, that might be a great source. Alexander is a really great academic mind as well, and he can certainly help you with that. Now, one of the last questions I wanted to throw out there, and like I said, there's a list of about 20 more I would have loved to jump through, but I knew that we would get deep into things, and I want to thank you for your time this evening. You mentioned in the book, and I think it's something so often overlooked, and I don't quite understand. I think our modern era expects that spirits are it. That's how you do it. You know what I mean? Everybody wants to. I think because there's this exhilaration with wanting to conjure a spirit. So people skip the amulets, they skip the talismans, they skip the things that could easily take care of 90% of the problems that someone's facing in their life without ever needing to summon a spirit whatsoever. But I guess that's not flashy enough. What is your experience looking through all of the different grimoires, especially ones you knew and ones I'm sure you certainly didn't, the correlation between using amulets and things of that nature to take care of most of the needs that a person would have in those time periods without actually having to go through the in-depth process of conjuration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's three threads running through the grimoires, really. You've got the conjuration, you've got the divination, and you've got the simple charms and spell stuff. In different degrees, depending on which particular grimoire it is, but those three are the constant threads all running parallel through. And yeah, as you say, exactly. There's a lot of charms, pentacles, etc. you can make that get the job done. The preparation and energy that goes into a conjuration, you need to have a good reason to do a conjuration. It's not just something you do for the sake of it. And it takes a lot of time and effort. So, as you say, most of the stuff can be done without needing to resort to conjuration. I've done them in the past. I don't tend to do that much conjuration currently because I don't have a need to do conjuration. For example, I love working with the Psalms, for example. I love the Psalms. I love the cadence they have, that they work whatever language they're in, whether it be Latin, Greek, English, French, Hebrew. I love doing Latin. Yeah. And so like some of the stuff that's in the Book of Gold, for example, I've used some of the Psalm charms in there to great effect. It's like you say, people want the CGI effects. At the end of the day, there's ancient Egyptian lines that said Heka was given to mankind by Ra to ward off the arrows of misfortune. And that's the thing, at the end of the day, when you do ritual, you're doing it to shift probabilities of desired outcomes. if you're already having those desired outcomes, you don't need to be doing ritual, because at the end of the day, and this is something that people get hung up on sometimes, magic is not just ritual. Ritual is an aspect of magic. Magic is about your entire way of being, how you live your life. So the rituals
Absolutely.
are part of that, but a lot of it is just your day-to-day, how you conduct yourself, how you treat the world around you, how you engage with people. It's everything, so just taking it as all about rituals, you're losing the point then if you do that. And I think everybody should do, if they're interested in grimoires, should do some conjurations, have the experience, because the first time you get that genuine spirit contact, it changes everything, as we said earlier. But doing it for the sake of it, no, it's not. It's not going to get you very far.
I agree. I think it's a waste of time to constantly be in the ritual chamber trying to evoke a spirit whenever, as you said, it's a lifestyle. It's who you are. It's how you see the world. Carlos Castaneda, in his phenomenal books, and it's a term I use constantly with everyone, place of pivot. Place of pivot is how you use the world, how you see the world, and how you interact with the world. And that's who your magical being becomes, because as you work your magic, as you connect to these spirits, it becomes everything you do. Going to the grocery store can be a magical event. Driving to work can be a magical event. It's how you see the world, how you interact with it. And once you start to incorporate that into your being, your whole entire life and perspective and everything changes. So there's not even a need as much to do ritual. And when you do ritual, as we said, most of those rituals can be consecrating a sympathetic link. It can be making an amulet. It can be doing something of that nature without ever having to call those beings. I like to look at, how can I make my magic powerful enough that I don't have to call them hardly ever? At this point in time, I only do a full-blown evocational ritual a few times a year. And I'm fine with that. I don't need it more than that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I don't have an altar. I have an altar to Hecate. That's a daily practice there for me. But I pay devotional tribute to her every single day. But I don't do full-blown conjurations of spirits from the PGM or anything like that without needing to. You know what I mean? Like it's just something that I think that the perspective these days is, as we know, need it, and we need it now on demand, and we want it, and we want to see it right this second. And even though I don't need to see her, I want to see her. I said that mindset, folks, I think has to stop and make it practical for you. How do you do it in a way that changes your life so that you don't need it again? And I think the tarot, one of the tarot books I had, it had a powerful statement in there, is one's magic should be the case to never need magic again, so to speak. Now, we obviously live magical lives, but when you do it properly, it should limit the amount of magic you ever need to use.
Yeah. And an effect of that is when you do stuff, it can be much more powerful.
Yes. Well, you said it before, the momentum. I think there's that buildup, that tension, that you retain that energy, that if you're not conjuring every 2-3 weeks and you do it, let's say 4 times a year, and truly when you need it, and you make sure everything's consecrated properly, and you do the fasting, and you do everything to a note, that is that momentum that you talk about in the book. Because folks, people say, oh, I don't want to cut the hazel wand on the specific day of the week, on the night of. There's a reason for it. The reason that you do that is because when you're standing out in the woods at nighttime, cutting a branch with a virgin blade and doing all these things, the time and effort and the exhilaration of doing that adds to it. So when you're in the ritual chamber, when you put the robes on, people say that there's no point in wearing ritual robes. There is, because when you slip that over, your person disappears and you become that character. You become the god within the ritual without inflating the ego, though. You still have to have that, as David said. But there's reasons for each and every part of this ritual. And when you do it, it creates maximum, resonance and what was the term we just used? You used in the book? We just said it a second ago. Momentum. Sorry, it left me there for a second. You create that magical momentum to really bring forth your desires into fruition. So, folks, just start to look at it a little bit differently. Go buy the book, both books, the Grimoire Encyclopaedia. Look at it once again. I'll show it to you. It's huge. Look at this bad boy. Like I said, that thing is huge. That's 1 of 2. Go pick it up, read through it, practice ancient forms of magic, and do them appropriately, because there's something within that field that can't be replaced in any other style of magic. And as we talked about, if you haven't had that true, and I mean, you have to ask yourself that true experience of evocation of a spirit. Once you do, and you're no longer playing yourself or playing into the fantasy, and you have it, everything changes forever. And it'll become something that you'll never let go of. People quit magic because they get frustrated because they haven't had it, but they also don't follow what they need. If you want to be a professional boxer, you don't skip gym day and then just go into the fight ring. You got to be in the gym every day, and it's work. And a lot of people don't make it past the gym to get to the ring. You have to do that, but I promise you, if you do, when you step in the ring, you have a great fight. And it'll be a wonderful thing that you live the rest of your life. It'll change every aspect of your life. So last question for you, David, and I think we'll jump off here and let you go. Out of your research into the writings of these books, what was the one thing that just blew you away? I mean, whether that's a grimoire that you didn't know about, or whether that was an aspect of something that you kind of connected the dots that you never knew before. What was the one thing that you would say that you just weren't expecting at all that kind of fell into your lap during this research?
There were a lot of them, but the one that springs to my mind first was back in 2005, I suggested that I thought there'd been influence from the macabre tradition into the grimoires. The Jewish macabre tradition. And, based on things I've seen, I didn't have definitive evidence, but I made the suggestion. I felt there was. And recent work, and something that I mentioned that's there in the grimoire, Summa Sacra Magicae, which people are working on, it's going to completely rewire and change things a lot because it's huge. There's 800-page working manual. That's the first place that things like an always turns up. It's incredible. When that finally breaks in English, it's way more important than things like 3 books for occult philosophy, for example. There's a bit in there, and you have the 7 items of clothing that the magician wears, and each of them has these divine names on. Now, one of the 100 books I included was Shiokoma, the Body of God, which is this heretical macabre text which describes the body of God and the measurements of the body of God and these divine names that are on all the different parts of the body of God. And in Summa Sacra Magicae, the names are embroidered onto the clothing that the magician wears. So you are literally wearing the divine names that from the body of God on your clothing. So you are embodying yourself with God to do the conjuration. So that verification of something from a macabre text from centuries earlier, that's from about 6th to the 9th or 10th century, into Summa Sacra Magicae, which is 1346, if I remember correctly. It was just so nice to have that validation that my instinct that there was macabre material creeping into the grimoires was proven. So that was one of the things that blew me away when I had that realization.
It's nice to see it connect the dots, absolutely, and get that assurity of like, okay, wow, I've always thought this, and it came to fruition by discovering it in old text. And I like the fact of how you said that having the pieces of clothing actually stitched with the name of God on you to embody and fully absorb that identity during ritual to become God. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that's in volume 2 in the section on all the different tools. That's the detail that's mentioned in there. But yeah, so because in Climbing the Tree of Life, in the introduction, my book on Qabalah, my first book on Qabalah, I mentioned this connection. So I put it in print in 2005, saying I think there's this connection. So it's just nice, 17 years later, to have the validation that I had been right. You have intuitive jumps and realizations, but until they're proven, that's what they are. They're these intuitions that you think, you're pretty sure of it, but it's nice to have there it is on paper or vellum or in front of you. I was actually correct. Yay. So
I love that. No, it's good to see it come to fruition, like you said, and it didn't happen overnight. And as you said, you put that book out in 2005. So you're talking, 15, 16, well, I guess almost 18 years later, it came to fruition in the newest work. So that's amazing to see that happen. Sometimes you just got to wait for it, but it's there. And Qabalah seems to seep its way into pretty much everything. I mean, there's no really greater system of explaining everything, in my personal opinion. I mean, from the creation of God to the creation of worlds to the astral to the physical to everything in between, the Sephiroth, the Qlipoth, everything. It just is such a nice meta system to explain every aspect of everything, and you end up finding little seed corns of it everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, some people say there's no Qabalah in the grimoires. Granted, most of them don't, but there are grimoires that do have Kabbalistic stuff in them.
Yeah. And I mean, and you think about it, still the Christian aspect came from the Judaic aspect. So, I mean, even though it's not inherently there, it still is in its own way. But if you look at it like that, I mean, we couldn't have had the Christian grimoire style if it wouldn't have been evolved from the Judaism and the Qabalah and then the thought of that time. So its essence is there. It's just kind of masked under a different form.
Yeah.
Well, other than that, I know that we've kind of went a little bit past, and I appreciate you allowing me to just pick your brain. Like I said, I'll definitely, if you're ever down, have to have you on again, because there's questions of more even on this book that I wanted to ask, let alone some of your other works that we can jump into or even have a firm discussion on Qabalah, as we were talking about. But
yeah, that feels like
anything else?
Part one.
What's that?
This feels like talk part one. It's only just
talk part. Yeah, folks, this is just part one. It's like his book, so you can expect more down the road. I mean, we got 2 parts of the Grimoire Encyclopaedia, and he says there's more coming. This is part 1. Part 2 will emerge at some point in the near future. So make sure you go pick up Encyclopedia, or the Grimoire Encyclopaedia, part 1 and 2. You're going to be hard pressed to find the hardback versions of them, but you can keep an eye on them. They're out there. You just gotta be vigilant. You can get the softback on different distributors out there. Hayden Press has it. I believe you can get them on Amazon. You can get them, which is very quick way of getting it. But they are beautiful books. Read through it. Enjoy it. David, anything else we should be watching out for coming up from you? And any last words you'd like to say before we close out?
I'm working on a little project at the moment, which I won't say for now, but something that I promised somebody I'd do. Then it's probably going to be working on volume 3. I mean, I've got a list of a number of books I want to write. There's a couple of other grimoires that I'd like to put out, translations, transcriptions of. So if somebody else doesn't do them first, then maybe that. But, sometimes other people work on a book and you're like, oh, they're already doing it. There's no point me doing it because they'll do a great job.
Yeah, if you know who's doing it, like for instance, I mean, if Dr. Skinner's putting something out, you can usually guess that if he's doing it before you, you're like, well, shit, I ain't going to be able to do it now because he's crushed it. So, I mean, the 2 of you, I'm sure, have that relationship where you've had ideas where the other one's completed before you could, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, with Joe Peterson, I usually like to know.
Yeah, another great one.
Doing so not to do that. It's like the Book of Oberon, he did that with Dan Harms and Steve and I had started working on it, and Jake had started working on it, but we found out that Joe and Dan were doing it, and they were further along than us. So we all just said, "You're going to do an amazing job. We'll get on with other stuff."
Yeah, just hit the brakes and just backed off and said, "Yeah, there's no point."
That's into this.
That's respect, though. I love that amongst you guys. Yeah, there's a huge respect between you guys.
Having that sort of community of other people doing stuff that you can bounce things off and say, hey, does anyone know this? And it'd be little things sometimes. It's like when Steve and I were doing Clavis Inferni, we'd done all this, we'd worked it all out, and we'd managed to decipher it all, and there was like one particular letter, we knew it was from a magic alphabet, and we couldn't find it. And I contacted Joe Peterson. He was like, he got back to me a few days later, going, "Oh, it's this one from such and such." It's great, thanks, Joe. It was just the one, because that was supposed to be book 2 in the source works, and ended up being book 5 because it took us about 2 years to decipher it all. So we ended up doing Keys to Gateway, and then Goetia and Veritable Key before Clavis came out. Because there was
great 5-book series.
Such a small book, there was so much to unpack in it. That you had. all this stuff that was Latin that was contracted and then reversed and things. So we had to work it all out, and yeah, that was an interesting experience.
Well, I'm sure it is, and like I said, and my listeners certainly appreciate it as well. The work that you guys do individually and together as a unit, cross referencing to each one another, it's amazing. And then, like I said, I hope you know how much you've contributed to the art of magic in the modern day, and the work that you've done, and Peterson and Skinner and everyone involved will live on for hundreds of years. I mean, there will be people well beyond us, long after we're gone, referring back to the work you've done with these two books, and the third and fourth, or however many you end up releasing. But we'll talk about these two here. They'll be referring back to this 100, 200 years from now, and that's awesome. That's a great feat to be able to accomplish. So kudos to that.
Thank you very much.
Well, other than that, David, I want to thank you so much for giving me the time today to come on to the show. And I appreciate everything you're doing. I'll be keeping an eye on future releases. And like I said, we'll have to get you on the show again down the road to talk more on magic and mysticism.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
All right, guys. Well, later this week. So this is a little bit of a strange week, folks. We have another episode this week. So we had this one special episode on Sunday. This Thursday, which would be the 24th, we have Taylor Elwood coming on the show. Great author, has a bunch of releases under his belt. He has a movement right now where it is sacred masculinity. So a different aspect than you would normally think of. And he talks about really embracing being a man and the masculine energy and what that means in magic. And it's been a movement he started and has been very, very adamant about. And we're going to be talking about that this Thursday. So make sure you tune into that. In a couple weeks, my other show, Celestial Oddities Pair of Normal Guys podcast, kicks in for season 4. I know there's a ton of you have been messaging me left and right because we ended up delaying it 2 months. There was a passing of a family member of my partner, and that kind of threw everything off. We are kicking into that in 2 weeks, so be excited for that. Other than that, guys, make sure you support David's work, and we will catch you next time on Knights of the Nephilim. Have a great night.